asato ma sadgamaya tamaso maham jyotirgamaya mrityurmam amritam gamaya avirahvir maedhi rudra yate dakshinam mukha te namaham pahinityam. Om, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality. Reach us through and through ourselves, and evermore protect us from ignorance by thy sweet, compassionate face. So my subject this morning is Swami Vivekananda in California. And we can pick up the story in 1899 in New York State in the Catskill Mountains at the Ridgely Manor, where Josephine MacLeod, a close friend and follower of Swamiji, had gotten word that her brother was ill and was dying in Los Angeles. And she was leaving to see him for one last time. And as she left, Swami Vivekananda told her, or asked her, he said, try to get up some classes for me while you're there, and I will come. And so Josephine, she took the train to Chicago, to Los Angeles, went to see her brother, and when she came into the room, there he was lying in his bed, and over the bed, there was a full-size portrait of Swami Vivekananda. And she was so surprised. And she asked the hostess, that is Mrs. Kate Blodgett, we're surprised to see that photograph. Why do you have that poster here? And Miss Blodgett said, oh, well, I heard him speak at the Parliament of Religions. It was so inspiring. I've read all his books. Oh, really, said Josephine. Well, I know him very well. In fact, he is right now in New York at Ridgely Manor. He would like to come to California. If you invite him, he will come. And about a week later, Swami Vivekananda received a letter from what he called California. And planned his trip, left for Chicago, and then by the Santa Fe, California Limited, came all the way across to Los Angeles. Arrived here like in the middle of December of 1899. And he went to stay for some time with Mrs. Kate Blodgett. Now, Los Angeles at that time was nothing like it is today. It more resembled a typical Midwestern town, population of about 100,000. Hollywood was a small community of about 500 Methodists. And, well, Santa Monica was there. There's no pier. But Swamiji began to give classes at the Home of Truth and at various lecture halls. He was not completely unknown in Los Angeles, particularly among those who followed religious metaphysical subjects, because his books had paved the way, particularly Raja Yoga was very well distributed and read. And it so happens that at that time, there was a stage play going on in Los Angeles. And that was about the only entertainment at that time. Well, there's no radio, there's no television, there's no movies. So what do people do? Well, maybe at best they can go to the theater and see a stage play, or they can see the vaudeville show. In any case, there was this stage play that was called, the title was My Friend from India. And it so happens that it was a satire, it was a comedy about Vivekananda how he was lionized by the rich and the elite citizens of New York State. And everyone enjoyed the comedy. And Swamiji went to see that and enjoyed it very much. This was in December. That is, it was the Christmas season. And he gave several lectures on the life of Christ. One in particular we have recorded by the shorthand stenography, entitled Christ the Messenger. Kind of a famous lecture which he gave in Los Angeles, where he spoke of the life of Christ and Jesus as an incarnation of God, and about of Christ consciousness, and about of the great messengers of the world. And as he spoke, the lecture hall filled with, well, those lecture halls would hold maybe 400, 600 people, filled with inspiration, and were stunned and amazed to hear this Hindu heathen speaking with such enthusiasm and such inspiration about the life of Jesus. Well, more inspiring than that they had heard even from a Christian missionary. After the lecture, people filed out quietly, deep in thought, and their minds lifted to a higher plane. A few devotees followed behind Swamiji as he returned to the Home of Truth, and they dared not speak because of the exalted mood, until they heard Swamiji say, "I've got it. I've got it." And Josephine MacLeod, who was following close behind, she said, "What is it, Swamiji?" She said, "They put a bay leaf in it." What in mulligatawny soup? He was thinking about the mulligatawny soup. And, well, it's kind of striking incident. Later, Josephine recalled how impressed she was with Swamiji, how he was always, he never had an air of self-consciousness or self-importance. And just saying those few words kind of broke that feeling of aloofness among the devotees who were with him. And there was a feeling of closeness and a feeling of Well, Josephine MacLeod says this is sometimes this is the sign of a great man. She said, whenever I was with him, we felt as if we ourselves were great. We felt good being with him. And then she quotes a writer who says that, yeah, that's the mark of a great person, that you may not exactly remember his words, but you'll never forget about how he makes you feel. And so Josephine MacLeod always used to say, when she was asked what was her test for spirituality, she would say, my test is always the feeling of courage that you feel in the presence of a holy man. At those Christmas season lectures, there were 3 sisters who were in attendance. Her name was Helen, Carrie, and Alice Mead. They invited Swamiji to come and live with them for some time in Pasadena and preach the gospel in Pasadena. And one day, he would stay at various houses, but one day there he came on the electric train. That is the trolley. Came all the way, happened to stop at that time right in front of the house, across the street, got off, came, and took up residence there at 309 Monterey Road. Well, that house is still part of the Vedanta Society of Southern California. It's an important place for us. For one thing, it is a historic site. Historic site means is that it's a place where historic sites are a place where you go where history was made. That means if you go there, why do you visit? We visit historic sites. Why? We visit them because they help us to realize things that we've just read about, things that we've just heard about in history, for example. So by visiting this house, which we can even today, it will help us to recall all that we've read about Swami Vivekananda, all that we've heard about it, give us kind of a place in the Mahakasha, that is in real three-dimensional space, what we've been carrying in our Chitta Kasha, that is our mental space all this time. Give it some concrete representation and a place, a peg where we can hang all those photographs. 5 photographs were taken there at the Vivekananda house, which we've all seen some of those photographs. Swamiji began to lecture in Pasadena, give classes there at the house. Gave a lecture at a place, the Echo Mountain House, away up in the high mountains there of the San Angeles National Forest, which you can see a picture of him riding up there on the funicular railway. And so like that, we can appreciate the historic site. But it's important for another reason, that house, because it is a holy place. Holy place means it's a place that was visited by a saint and by a Jivan Mukta and by a realized soul. And why is it holy? Well, you know, as as students of yoga psychology, we believe in the mystery of human vibrations, and that as we we ourselves, we have radiating around us kind of a heat and magnetism and and electromagnetic vibrations. And just as those things radiate from our bodies, so too does our character radiate from us like an aura. And everything that we touch, it takes an imprint. It's like a fingerprint that we leave wherever we go. We leave an imprint on the places where we go. How much more so is it with a saint and sage, a person whose mind is concentrated and is focused, and is all of the molecules of the psyche are just in alignment like a battery of will. And so the impression that is left there, that is the building and the furniture and the space itself. Of course, now the furniture isn't there anymore. The building's there, and even if the building was gone, it wouldn't matter, because the akasha still continues to vibrate. And, well, you may say that sounds like New Age talk, the New Age vibration. No, this is a very ancient teaching of the Rig Veda, that this is how the universe was created, through the vibration of the prana. And so there we can still get the benefit of a holy place by visiting those places. He gave various lectures and classes there in Pasadena. One famous lecture he gave that we have recorded, entitled My Life and Mission. As you know, each person, I'm just going to ramble on here. See, the time may not get finished. But he gave that talk, My Life and Mission. And each one of us, of course, we have a mission. We are born on earth. We have a mission. We have a message. We have something to do. We have something to say. That's why we were born on the earth. Play our part, do our dharma. But the great saints and sages, that is the world teachers, they have a world message. They have a world mission. And so it was with Vivekananda. He had a world mission. At first, when he came to America, he wasn't exactly clear what that was. He thought that when he first came, that his idea was to raise money to help the people of India. But after he was here in America and he got the lay of the land, in 1895 and 96, he came to understand that he had a message that he said, I have a message for the West as Buddha had a message for the East. And what was that message? Well, it was the Vedanta Philosophy. The Vedanta Philosophy, that means the philosophy of the Upanishads. The outstanding fundamental theme, that is of the Brahma Vidya, that there is a universal spirit, that God has created this world, God has entered into the world, that God has become everything, that God is, the goal of life is to see God in everything, and that we ourselves are not the body, we are not the mind, but that we are the spirit. And the goal and purpose of our life is to realize our spiritual self, to realize our higher self, to become one with our self, to become one with God, and because God has become everything, to become one with everything. This is the teaching, the Vedanta, but this was the message, Vedanta philosophy. We read about that in My Life and Mission. After the lecture, he asked for questions. And of course, the usual crocodile question came up. Do they really throw babies do Hindu families throw their babies to the crocodiles? See, people had heard from Christian missionaries that in India, during times of famine, They couldn't feed their families, and so they threw their babies into the story that they're told, that the Christian missionaries reported when they returned. It was so terrible, they threw their babies into the Ganges, and of course there are crocodiles in the Ganges. And so Swamiji was asked there, do they throw their babies to the crocodiles? And he said, Vivekananda answered, he said, well, yes, madam. He always called women, he always addressed them as madam. Yes, madam, they do. In fact, I was thrown myself. But I was such a fat little baby that the crocodiles couldn't get their teeth around me. They couldn't eat me, and so I got free. And so whenever I think of myself as a fat monk, and I feel sorry about that, I feel bad about that, he said, I think about how I escaped. And I'm thankful for that. I don't know why he said that he was a fat monk, because if you see the couple pictures that we have of a profile, you don't get the impression he's fat, but that's what he said. So my life and mission. After that lecture, he left Southern California, went north, the Southern Pacific Railroad, traveled north to Oakland, Alameda. From there on the ferry boat, crossed over there. There's no Bay Bridge, there's no Golden Gate Bridge. Crossed over on the ferry boat to the Embarcadero, and there he took up residence in San Francisco. He was in the company of Alice Hensborough, from which we have got most of these reminiscences are recorded, so they're first-hand account of what went on. But they rented a flat there in 1719 Turk Street, a building that's still standing, and but is not owned by the Vedanta Society. The third floor, a flat means a whole floor of a building, the third floor, and we have the floor plan, so we can see the floor plan. And where Swamiji used to give his classes there's a parlor, and then there's an adjoining room, which was Vivekananda's room. They'd opened that door, and then they could hold maybe 60 or 80 people, which they would fill easily for the classes. And so he would give classes there. He would give classes there also at the Home of Truth. I mentioned the Home of Truth in Los Angeles. The Home of Truth was a denomination of the New Thought movement. Now, New Thought is what today we would include under such things as when we think about Christian Science, Unitarianism, unity, Ernest Holmes' Science of Mind. That is, it was a broad umbrella term that included a whole groups of churches and people and individuals and philosophers who shared a metaphysical worldview. The spirit is the fundamental reality, that all men and women are embodiments of spirit, that we are divine beings. They believed in the power of positive thinking and the law of attraction and in spiritual healing. All kind of comes down to us through American transcendentalism. And as you know, Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was the chief spokesman for that movement, how he was influenced by Indian philosophy. And so too, these new thought writers were influenced. Mary Baker Eddy, for example, for the first 17 editions of her Science of, whatever her book is called, Science of Mind, Christian Science. She had quotations there from the Bhagavad Gita. After the 17th edition, they were removed and you never saw them again. But they had some famous writers. One writer, which I will mention to you, is the William Walker Atkinson, because his books are so interesting and so helpful to us to understand Vedanta. He went by the pseudonym of Yogi Ramacharaka, and he used to write a lot about Hindu yoga and yogic, the science of breath, and interesting subjects of yoga psychology. This was all part of New Thought. Maybe some of you have read the famous book called In Tune with the Infinite by Ralph Waldo Trine. That was a very famous book, still today, I think, among people with metaphysical interests, the New Thought people, writers. They believed that you could be healthy, happy, and prosperous if you believed and lived in tune with the infinite. This was their idea. So Swami Vivekananda was very that is, the followers of the Home of Truth, they loved Vivekananda. He was their favorite guest, and that was his later on was his kind of his home address in San Francisco, where he had his mail sent to that address, and so he gave classes there, and these are ongoing, like every night classes, to a smaller number of people. Now, a larger number of people would assemble, for example, when he crossed on the ferry to Alameda and lectured at the First Unitarian Church of Reverend Benjamin Fay Mills. There the auditorium, I think today holds about 400 people. So those were crowded and filled for a series of 6 lectures. But for the most part, those are lectures and classes, but for the most part, he gave lectures in lecture halls in San Francisco. And this is something which maybe we're not familiar with today. Maybe it belongs to a bygone era. But it was the fashion in those days for there were speaker bureaus who would hire famous people to travel and would book them into cities all over the country as public speakers. And so that was a favorite form of speaking. I don't even know if you can find that today. Well, maybe sometimes in Pasadena, if you go to Caltech, you can find, on occasion, like public lectures. But I think it's kind of rare today to find a public. Very common in those days. What you'd do is you'd have a manager would hire a hall, and then he would sell tickets, maybe for 10 cents a piece, and people would buy those tickets, and then the money made would pay for the hall, and they would pay something to the speaker and to the managers. And so like that, Swami Vivekananda spoke in various lecture halls, which those halls would hold like maybe 800, maybe 1,000 people. So he had a big audiences at that time. On one occasion, we remember that, or we were told in the reminiscence of Miss Hansborough, that he had Mr. Allen, that means the man, he later became the president of the Vedanta Society, one of two societies that was officially started in the United States, one in New York, one in San Francisco. He later became the president, but he was organizing lectures for Swamiji. One lecture he organized, was on Sri Krishna and his message. Sri Krishna and his message, expected to begin at 3 p.m. And the lecture hall is filled. Maybe there's 800 people there. And at 3:30, still no lecturer. There's no speaker. And Mr. Allen goes out. He looks down Powell Street, and there far down the street, he sees Swamiji walking up the street in his characteristic, regular, majestic rhythm, slowly walking up. Mr. Allen ran down the street. Swamiji, it's a lecture, it's scheduled to begin at 3 o'clock. You're very late. He said, you have to hurry. And Vivekananda said, well, why should I hurry? It's kind of like the man who was scheduled for a hanging. He was scheduled to be hanged at 3 o'clock, and he thought that he also was late, but he said, why should I hurry? Nothing will happen until I get there. And so saying, he stopped, and he had his shoes polished. Meanwhile, Mr. Allen, of course, was frantic. Similar thing happened with Reverend Benjamin Fay Mills, that they were going to returning to the Unitarian Church. They had to catch the ferry. They went down for the streetcar, and the streetcar was there. Reverend Mills called to Vivekananda. He said, hurry up, so you have to run. We have to catch this car. Vivekananda said, well, won't there be another? And because he would never run to catch the train or to catch the streetcar. And so Reverend Benjamin Fay Mills, he said, well, yes, there will be another, but if we miss this, then we may be late for the ferry, and then we'll have to wait for half an hour for the next ferry. And Swamiji said, yeah, well, so what of that? And then the Reverend says, oh, you Hindus, you have no sense of time. And Swamiji says, he said, yes. He says, you live in time. We live in eternity. So that was his. Those are. You can read for yourself those reminiscences. There are a few more on this theme about hurrying up and missing the train, and culture clash of different frameworks of time. So, well, we were talking about the lecture in San Francisco called My Life and Mission. And I want to say a little bit more about the theme that Swamiji, of Vivekananda's message in California. The emphasis and the theme of his teaching. And as you know, when he came, he realized that his purpose was to preach the Vedanta philosophy. That was one phase of evolution. And the Vedanta philosophy is the philosophy of the Upanishads. And it teaches us things like, well, you can read in the famous lecture called The Common Bases of Hinduism. It's a lecture given in India. But there he talks about the ideas that are common to all of the different denominations or sects of Orthodox Indian Vedanta philosophy. And Atman, Brahman, karma, reincarnation, Maya, the idea of great cycles, the reverence for the Vedas and revealed texts, all these things that we know are shared ideas, basic beliefs, shared in common by all different denominations of Hinduism. But there's also differences. And in fact, this Vedanta, what we call the Vedanta philosophy, has three different schools of metaphysics. One is dualism, one is qualified non-dualism, and one is monism, or Advaita, or non-dualism. Now, usually these are thought of and presented kind of like a hierarchy. That is, it's a holarchy. It's a progression from lower truth to higher truth. It's an evolution. It's a psychological evolution. It's kind of historically a sociocultural evolution from the lower conception of God, called the evolution of the conception of God, because the fundamental distinguishing difference here is metaphysics. And traditionally, the reason I'm telling you this, I'm trying to, what is the theme of Vivekananda in California? Traditionally, the idea is that one begins, of course, our ideal is Vedanta, of course, is a philosophy of life. It's not just an academic philosophy. Our goal and purpose is to realize these ideas and to manifest them in our life. And in so doing, traditionally the idea is that we begin with dualism, and that we are separate from God. Dualism means, then we move to qualified non-dualism, that is, God was everywhere and in everything and in our hearts. And then the highest evolution, we can imagine ourselves climbing a mountain, and the highest, the highest generalization, the greatest generalization, is that of spiritual non-dualism, that is, of Advaita, the crowning glory of the Vedanta philosophy. Now, traditionally, it's always been thought that we move from we move from lower truth to higher truth. Makes sense. That we begin where we're at, and we begin to climb the mountain up to the highest truth. Then in the traditional idea is that in the beginning, this Advaita Vedanta teaching is not suitable, cannot be realized by all people all at once. People have to be led to it gradually through the practice of worship, prayer, and other sorts of prevalent religious practices. And this was kind of the teaching. This is the traditional way of presenting the Vedanta philosophy. This is the way it's kind of presented by Swami Vivekananda in 1895-96. But when he returned to India, his ideas keep kind of evolving. We read those lectures from Colombo to Almora, given in India, very important for us as Westerners to read those lectures, because what does he do in those lectures? He talks about what he taught in America. So that's why the best way to know what he intended to talk, or what he wanted to talk about, that is, he's telling his Indian audiences what he preached in America. But there we see that he was beginning to question this old traditional way of this moving from the lower truth to the higher truth. That is expressing some impatience with that idea. How long will it take? Because after all, this has been going on for thousands of years. And for thousands of years, people have been practicing beginning with those stages. Where are we at? Doesn't seem like much progress has been made. That is, there's still a clash and among the no harmony of religion. Where is the harmony of religions? There's still a conflict between all the religions. How much progress? How long will we have to wait before we can realize the ideals of spiritual non-dualism? And so like this in India, he began to question in his mind. There in India also he founded the Advaita Ashram, which I'll mention in a minute. He also began to, that's what he called he said, let's try a new experiment. And he founded that ashrama in the Himalayas. Later on the ship, a big steamship, where he returned to the second visit to the West with Swami Turiyananda and Sister Nivedita. He said, this is the older that I grow, the more everything seems to me to lie in manliness. This is my new gospel. And like this, he goes on, we can read in the Masters I Saw Him to Sister Nivedita, he talks about his new gospel. And what was this? And so therefore that kind of sets the stage for what in San Francisco he called his bombshell lecture. Title was, Is Vedanta the Future Religion? And in that lecture, he spoke about his fundamental theme. That is about Advaita Vedanta. Advaita Vedanta means spiritual non-dualism. Non-dualism means that all this is a non-dual reality. That all this is a non-dual reality. That there is no difference here. That you are not the body, that you are not the mind, that you are a divine spirit soul, that you have to think of yourself as a divine spiritual soul. The spirit, this is where it comes from, that spirit of manliness. That means that spirit of strength, the spirit of the Upanishads. In this lecture, kind of a controversial lecture, where he introduces Advaita Vedanta. As he says, he defines it as, he says sometimes it's a new religion. There's no book, there's no person, there's no personal God. That means there's no Bible, there's no particular book, there's no founder, there's no spiritual founder of this religion, this Vedanta philosophy. There's no there's no worship of any particular person. God is not a particular person. God, the Ishvara, that is the God of the Upanishads, is an impersonal God. He appears, he says, nameless and formless. He appears as gods and goddesses with names and forms, but he also appears as all of humanity. As he says there, you are all personal gods, and not just the humans, but you and I, the cat, the rat, the devil, and the ghost, all are personal gods. This is a teaching of spiritual non-dual. Why can't we cut to the chase? You see, this is the idea being, what did Vivekananda mean by a new experiment? In that lecture, he speaks fondly of the Advaita Ashram, which he founded in the Himalayas, dedicated to non-dualism, where it's forbidden to worship any particular person as God. There's no pictures there. There's no shrine. There's nobody even in their private rooms. You're not allowed to have pictures of gods and goddesses. And after all, you really don't need them, because you walk out the door and there you look up and you see the range of the Himalayan mountains there before you. You don't need any of those pictures. But this was his ashrama, a unique ashrama dedicated to that ideal of Advaita Vedanta, that is to say, God is to be worshipped in spirit and in truth. So that's for students of Vedanta. It's just something that we can think about, kind of as our mull over in our mind. What did he mean by a new experiment? What did he mean by my new gospel? And is Vedanta, that is Advaita Vedanta, the future religion? So after that lecture, that kind of marks the conclusion of, do I still have a few minutes here?
Yeah, 10 minutes.
Yeah. Huh?
10 minutes.
Yeah. Okay, that kind of marks the end of his public lectures in San Francisco. And it so happens that at that time, devotees of the Home of Truth had arranged to go on a retreat, to leave the city and to go to a place which was called Camp Taylor Resort. Today it's called the Samuel P. Taylor State Park. And you can imagine, they got to get these group of them, along with Swamiji, together. They leave from Alameda on the ferry boat. There's no Golden Gate Bridge. They're carrying all of their trunks, all of their provisions for six people, I think. Together they got there, they got on a narrow gauge train, took them to Camp Taylor, which was kind of like a little resort. It had a hotel, but they didn't stay, they stayed off in the woods. That is, this is the area, the coast redwoods. This is the great California live oaks. That is these big Douglas fir forests. And we have pictures of the camp and of the camp stove, one of the ladies standing by the camp stove. And there were they put 5 tents, which they brought with them. It kind of boggles your brain how they could take all the provisions. They stayed there for 2 weeks. So all those provisions, all those tents, they probably had to get off the train, hire a horse, the carriage, wagon, take them. So there they stood for 5 weeks. So you can imagine how these days pass today, walking in the forest. At night, they'd have a campfire. And around the campfire, Vivekananda would tell the wonderful stories about India. And you can read about this in the reminiscence of Alice Hansborough. It's fitting that his last days in California, it's very fitting that he would spend them in the forest, kind of teaching in the morning. You get up and be chanting by the Paper Mill Creek. Under the great trees, just as where Vedanta had begun thousands of years ago in the Himalayas, in the forests. And so too here it's kind of replayed, the whole thing, in mountain caves and glades, forest deep. There he's there with the devotees, teaching the Vedanta philosophy. So then, at the end of, left there, and at the end of May, he left for New York via Chicago. An interesting footnote. When he got to New York, Vedanta Society, Swami Vedarupananda, Swami Turiyananda had been staying there. And they had been talking about if they could just have a retreat, if they could somehow have a meditation retreat in America, what wonderful good it would be. And it so happened that her name was Mrs. Minnie Book. She had gotten a land grant, 160 acres from President McKinley, which she gifted to Swami Vivekananda. That land grant is a piece of land in the San Antonio Valley, which is about 200 miles southeast of Santa Clara County of San Francisco. And it became now what we call Shanti Ashrama. So Swami Vivekananda said it has a special significance to us, because Swami Vivekananda, to speak in devotional terms, it's a retreat that was arranged by the will of the Divine Mother of the universe. That is, Swamiji told Swami Triyananda, I want you to go there and to start teachings there in the Shanti Ashram. Of course, there was nothing there. And Swami Triyananda said, oh, well, he said, well, it's the will of the mother. He didn't want to go there. He said, no, it's not the will of the mother, it's your will. And then Vivekananda says, no. So if your nerves become finer, then you will understand. And he agreed, and he came there, and a wonderful story that you can read about Swami Triyananda, how the hardships, how do you travel with all of these bags and these baggages by train, by stagecoach, by horse and wagon, over hill and dale, out to a place which is out in the middle of nowhere. And there they stayed and founded what we call today the Shanti Ashrama. That's a story you can read about. Well, so that concludes the California Swami Vivekananda in California. His the second visit to the West, and the conclusion, kind of the end of his phase of his giving of his world message. Important, this California message mission part was important for two reasons. Number one, as he told later Swami Advaita, Vedanta, and it is in California that Vedanta will grow. And so it seems that according to the divine plan, he returned for the second, that was his purpose, returning to the West for the second phase of his world mission, particularly to come to California, to give those lectures, and to highlight and emphasize what is maybe the second important point, to highlight and emphasize and underline and focus on the essence of the Vedanta philosophy, which is spiritual non-dualism, which is Advaita, which is that which is the rationale and the ideal for our spiritual practice. All students of the Vedanta societies and all of the followers of Sri Ramakrishna are Advaitins. That is, they're followers of the philosophy of non-dualism. And so sometimes it's helpful for us to think about, in fact, in all religions, they talk about, it's kind of spiritual practice for us sometimes to contemplate the lives of the saints. And that's what we're doing this morning, just thinking over, recalling some of the incidents of the lives of great Jivan Mukta, how he was here in California and walked these streets and in these cities. And by contemplating those incidents, we can find those great souls are landmarks. That is to say, they're exemplars. They're role models. Not only do they inspire us and they edify us and they help us to take positive steps forward to realize our own highest ideal.
Thank you, Swami Vedarupananda, for a thrilling recounting of Swami Vivekananda in California. And perhaps most of us do know that you are fortunate to reside at Swami Vivekananda House in South Pasadena as the caretaker and host for the events that are there. And we're really grateful to get inspired by those, remembering those events. So thank you so much for recounting them, making them come alive for us today. Next week, our speaker will be Swami Sarvadevananda. His topic, Sangha, Buddha to Vivekananda 2. And tomorrow is Memorial Day. Traditionally at the Vedanta Society, we do a collective reading of the complete works of Swami Vivekananda. And we'll be starting at 10 in the morning. And we are not meeting in person yet. We'll be doing it in our own places, but collectively we'll be reading the complete works at least twice over. Many of you have signed up already. And we will be broadcasting on YouTube, at our YouTube channel. Also, next week, at our Santa Barbara Temple, talks, and starting next week, talks and classes will be online and in person. Masks are required, and devotees are welcome to go in person to the Santa Barbara location only. Other locations are still closed to the public. I would request Swami Vedarupananda to give a closing chant.
Om Dyo Shanti Antariksha Shanti Prithivi Shanti Apa Shanti Oshadaya Shanti Vanaspataya Shanti Vishwe Deva Shanti Brahma Shanti Saravam Shanti Shantireva Shanti Same Shantiredhi Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om, peace is in heaven, peace is on the earth, peace is in the sky and in the waters. The herbs and plants and trees are full of peace. The gods are peaceful. May this eternal universal peace enter our souls and beings. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all.